I was born in Columbus Hospital in Chicago, which was a Catholic hospital. It's the same one where my little sister was born and where my grandmother died. Early memories, a lot of them, just some from Chicago, where a lot of the places that we lived. My mom was usually at home. Our grandmother lives with us. We lived in a really nice area. We always had a maid who was really part of the family, Adele. And as our financial decline happened for my family, we moved from the really nice area into a small house in Chicago. It was sad because my mother cried when she had to let Adele go, who was our maid, this really sweet Black lady. I kind of had a little bit of a grudge about her at one point because she was having me clean the windows. I didn't know what I was doing, like really little, but she was just trying to keep me busy and stuff like that. When my mom had to let her go, and that was, that was one of the times I saw my mom cry, because she felt so bad about that. Just because she was Black, I mean, she was our friend. She was part of the family, so that was hard for my mom. Then we moved into a different area when I started grade school. It was a pretty nice grade school. And I had my little Cub Scout outfit, and I remember walking to school in that. And, it was also a grade school that actually had an indoor swimming pool, which was pretty cool. So, that's kindergarten and first grade. I think before, at one point, I must have been probably second or third grade. And I actually had one of those bicycle things where you'd sell ice cream. I was like I'm like, what are they doing giving me, even letting me have this? But my first job, it was me with my little red wagon going through the alleys and going up steps and getting bottles off of people's back porches. And most buildings had like 3 floors and like double stairs because there's apartments on each side. What I was going to say was all the stuff about, going in and turning in the bottles and stuff like that. And it's like, can you imagine like a little, 6-year-old kid going around collecting bottles and trying to, just like have money for comic books. We were always kind of spoiled, even though we didn't have a lot of money. At the end of third grade, they decided that they had this A-B school system where depending on what part of the year you were born in, you started school then. So it was a half year thing. After the first half of the third grade, we moved to Indiana into this big old house that was basically like a mansion that was run down. And that I know that we had lived down there once when I was like really little. I don't even know how long we were there. But, so then when we moved to Indiana, I was automatically put in the fourth grade. And so I skipped a half a year. Plus I was also, a January baby. So somehow that helped. And so we lived in this little town. We went from the big city to this little town of Princeton, Indiana, where we had this family home. It was a very nice life. I'm glad that I grew up down there partially. Going into the fourth grade, I was smart. I always did good in school. So at one point, I was failing spelling. It was because the kids down there had been writing instead of just printing since kindergarten or the first grade. And so my writing was sloppy, which it still is today. It was one of those things where I had to step up, correct that problem. And then that's also when JFK died. Our principal came in and told the teacher what happened. And I remember going home and my mom was crying and, watching a little black and white TV and stuff. And, I didn't realize what that really was, but I do remember it pretty well, seeing it, on TV. And that's still a focus in my life of why he was killed. And I think we've all pretty much found out, a lot of us understand what really happened. And it was basically our own government staging a military coup. He didn't want to go into the Vietnam War. He didn't want to invade Cuba. He had a bunch of crazy things to do. And then why did they kill his brother? Why did they kill Martin Luther King? And it's all our government. And it was for control. What I learned more about Black people was living in that small town. I had the whole Black side of Princeton, Indiana, plus, I mean, I had about 3/4 of the town. I'd always go in and get hot chocolate and play the pinball machine. And sometimes I'd take my sled on the route because of snow. Sometimes if we had a car around, my mom would get up and drive me early in the morning. You get your newspapers delivered. First I did the local paper, and then I did the big paper from out of town. That's when all of a sudden you'd pay by check, you'd collect the money and you give a check to your boss who came in from the big city. And we were in basically kind of hard times. So I had 2 checking accounts. And that was because when the guy came to collect the money, my mom would usually deal with him. My dad was a traveling salesman, so he wasn't around very much. All of a sudden he had 4 kids, and then my younger brother was born down there, which made it 5 kids, and my grandmother had died, who'd been part of the income. So we went and lived in this house, and my mom had been born across the street from the big hospital. It's still there. It's like a landmark. You can't tear it down. And we lived on State Street, which was just like 4 blocks from the actual courthouse, and my mother was a very intelligent woman, so was my father. And my mother was raised in a convent because her father had passed away. My grandmother moved to Chicago because she could work there. And she was a fortune teller. And she was also an artist. And she drew pictures of my mom's children before they were born. So she was truly actually psychic. Maybe. Kind of. And she actually told Lucy and Desi that they were going to get married. She worked in a place that's like the Copacabana. It was actually Jacques' French restaurant, which was like the big deal on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. I can remember going in there with my dad, and he would pick her up. And my dad had to drop out of law school. He'd been in the Army. He was a typist. He didn't see any war or anything, but he would tell me silly stories. My dad was a humorous guy, and he loved reading. He's one of those people who had to read. He liked detective things. Guess what? I find those stories interesting. But he would read all kinds of stuff. He'd read comic books with me and all these different things. He was a kind man, but here he was, this guy who was an orphan, who was born in Canada and then adopted by the Donnellys. And he always thought the Donnellys adopted him because there's a lot of Donnellys up there. So he felt his mother's name was Lottie Gordon. That's all we really know. And when I lived in Indiana and I had my first paper out, the first day, because I'm like in the 4th grade, and I'd just seen the movie To Kill a Mockingbird. It was a fall day. There's leaves on the ground, and it's starting to get dark, and I'm delivering the Princeton Chronicle, and I was walking my route. And here I am, this little kid. I'm not even familiar with this town. And I'm like, I got a job. I'm going to do this stuff. A little paper bag around my shoulder. All of a sudden, it started getting dark and windy, and there's all these leaves. And I'm like, sounds like somebody's following. So that's a funny memory. When I would go, and when I had the larger paper out, the papers would be delivered at the bakery. And right next door to the bakery was a pool hall. And I would get donuts from the bakery, nice glazed donuts. That's how I got fat as a child. I love donuts. I still love donuts. So, those are great memories, and sometimes I would get a barbecue beef sandwich at the pool hall. And so that's where I would roll up my newspapers, because then you're throwing the newspaper, you have your bike and your saddlebags, your baskets and stuff, so I had most of the town, so I basically knew everybody, and I guess they thought I was a cute kid or something. It's like, what are you going to be when you grow up? I'm going to be a doctor or a lawyer. Well, guess what? I'm so glad I'm not a doctor or a lawyer. I would watch TV. I'd stay up late at night. Still do. I love watching old English movies because we had English heritage, and supposedly there was a castle in England. And they also were over in Illinois, where we still have property that I pay the taxes on. It's like 30 acres of wooded area. And I've been there when I was a little kid. My mom used to love driving over there, which wasn't close to us, but Princeton, Indiana is right on the river, and on the other side, it's Illinois. Everything was black and white at our house. We had one friend, a family that lived about a block and a half away, where they had a color TV. I'd go over there on Sunday and we'd watch Bonanza. That's where I watched the Beatles on Ed Sullivan and, all that kind of stuff. And they were like a really nice, wholesome family. And the father actually ran for mayor at one point. Guess what? I worked on his campaign. How about that? Way back then. Well, aside from wanting to be a hippie, I had to cut my hair. They complained at school, after the Beatles came out, that my hair was too long. And I'd get teased. Plus, I was really fat from eating all the damn donuts. I'm a little fat guy, a little long, And so I remember I went home and I cut my own hair. You know what I mean? That was in 64. So, like really early on. And when I moved back to Chicago, I was 13. That was 1967. That was the year that Sgt. Pepper's came out, and they were becoming much more hippie. And so I'm like, wow, I get to Chicago, I'm going to be a hippie. So when I got to Chicago, one of the first things I did, and I see these hippie guys walking around. This is like cool, and I'm like trying to get the hair growing and stuff. And so I went into Second City. I was 13 years old, and I went in there and I told them I wanted to get involved. Well, they said, come back when you're older. We don't have classes for kids. Well, a few years later, that became a real thing where they actually put on children's shows with kids that take classes. I went to the Art Institute of Chicago on my own, and I took art class. And I also would go and see big plays and musicals because I was interested in all those kind of things. I saw Mame. Who goes to see Mame? You know what I mean? And it was very, very interesting. I really enjoyed doing that. Maybe it explains why I'm a TV addict and love movies and books, because I love stories. They're interesting, and some are more interesting than others. And this little town that I've been there like twice. Once when I was a teenager, I went down there, I hitchhiked down there with a couple of my hippie friends. It was kind of a cool city, little town. And our family actually had owned what was now the post office. So that's some of this history that I know about my family. And the other thing I was going to say about in Princeton, with the three biggest homes were the ones that all turned out to be working with the Underground Railroad. And I thought it was really cool to find out that the other two families were doing the same thing. So these were the wealthiest people, and they were trying to do something good. Maybe that's why I've never been a racist person, because I know that history. And then, you always learn more. So I've but when we were down there, it was for a funeral. It was only the second time I went back to that town since I lived there. And that was because my younger brother passed away. I've never really been friends with my older brother because he's kind of a jerk and a racist. And he says he's not anymore. But yeah, that's a whole nother story. He's been in prison a few times. He's like there's something happened to him when he was a kid, because I remember my parents taking him to see therapy, and he didn't want to wear his glasses. He always wanted to be cool. I have one good memory of we used to watch a show called Svengoolie on Friday nights in Chicago. And I was still pretty little. It's when we lived in this nicer house that was by that last grade school I went to. I apparently was sleepwalking because me and my brother slept in a room with a bunk bed. I was on his back trying to, I thought he was the werewolf or something. And so something like that happened. I don't remember completely, but I do remember that happening. Wow. They have their magic bag of tricks. Like me, I can come up with different impressions for any occasion and things like that. And I thought to myself, I said, well, you know what? I think this is great. So to take that into the hippie days, the last time I took LSD, me and my two buddies that I was like in a band with, and we lived in the hippie coach house, we were tripping and we went down by the lake and the storm was coming in. And then there's these rich guys in their cabin cruisers that are going to go out in the storm. And we thought, wow, man, these people are so wow, they're going to go out in the storm. What are they, nuts? And it turned out we were the nuts because it started pouring on. And so it was the furthest I ever ran. And the most I'd ever run was like a mile in high school on the football team or something. a slow mile. So we ran all the way back to the hippie coach house, and there I was changing in my little hippie bedroom that I'd painted the walls green. I had Indian prints. I painted the TV green. Pretty hippied out place. I'm tripping my brains out. And I think I turned on. Either way, I started watching TV because I'm addicted to TV. I'm changing. I'm on TV. It's the Son of Svengoolie comes on. Now, what I wasn't thinking about was why would it be on in the afternoon? Okay. And this guy was actually a disc jockey, Jerry G. Bishop in Chicago, and he put on the wig and the, oh, hey, boys and girls. Now I'm changing out of my wet clothes because we were so, he's going, today, boys and girls, we've got a big treat for you. We're going to meet our cameraman, Jesse. And Jesse, he's got a problem. And he had like a little sock puppet type thing, and it said Jesse on it. And he goes, if he doesn't stop drinking, he's going to die. He's a real nice guy, but he's going to die. And I'm like, oh, really? Oh, this is strange. I never planned on being a cameraman. I hadn't thought about doing video things at that point. But as a young kid in Indiana, I would watch Johnny Carson show and Joey Bishop, and all the celebrities would come on, and some of them would talk about how they get bothered all the time, how people are like coming up to them when they're eating in a restaurant and bugging them, and some people aren't that, whatever. And I thought, wow, yeah, I want to be in that business, but I don't want to be that star person. I'd rather be the guy behind the scenes, because you're not going to have that problem. Well, guess what? I did become a cameraman. My first job after going to Columbia College for 1 year was a cameraman at Catholic TV. I was born in a Catholic hospital. That's the Catholicest I ever got. It's just interesting that how what that guy was talking about is I see a lot of things that have turned out to be the way I would like them to be. There's a lot of things that I think about every day, because as we get older, we think about things that we did. And apparently that's why we're doing this now. Well, I can talk to anybody, but what do I really have to say that somebody wants to hear? Nobody wants to hear my life story. Well, maybe they do.